2 Peter chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 in the New American Standard Bible. Grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. For his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness, through the true knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. Through these he has granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world on account of lust. So here the author is opening up a letter to a group of Gentile believers who are learning what it really means to be a part of the faith. In this intro, the author states that we are partakers in the divine nature. Josh Patterson, what does it mean to you, and why do you believe the author may have included that in an introduction? That line about partakers of the divine nature. Why do you think he would have included that in an introduction of what it means to be Christian?
Yeah, so I'm not going to claim to speak for the author because I'm going to give my interpretation of this and what I think it means to participate within the divine nature. And I know for a fact the author didn't have this in mind because I'm going to offer a process perspective. So for me, as a process person, much to Aaron's chagrin, I believe that God is present in each moment, inviting us into the next best thing that is good and beautiful and true. And so one of the things that Jesus did really well was he gave into that divine lure in each moment of Jesus's becoming, to the point where Jesus literally becomes the image of the invisible God. And I think the invitation is there for us as well. And so through Jesus's example, we are shown that we too can give in to the divine lure, participate within what God is doing, and become more like God and bring the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven. And so I think, that's kind of when I think about participating within the divine nature, that's where I go.
Yeah, I can dig it. Not sure how on board I am, but I dig it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Whole Church Podcast. If you're on YouTube, you'll notice several faces. And you're like, oh, this must be a roundtable. But then you're like, wait, you didn't use the right music. That's right. It's fine. I'll fix it in post for the podcast. It's cool. We are back with the roundtable, first roundtable of the new year, and we're rounder than ever. We have several guests. Sometimes we say roundtable and it's just Joe or Joe and Christian. But today, for our first roundtable, we're going to be talking about spirituality kind of in general and then like contemplative practices. Aaron Simmons is back. You just met him last week. He's back. So your favorite philosopher that talks about Kierkegaard and what it means to live a life worthy of your finitude. And then you're like, wait a minute, who's that process guy at the beginning? Yeah, that's right. Your favorite process podcaster who's not Tripp, if Tripp's listening, and Tripp's not listening, who's even better than Tripp, the one and only Josh Patterson. From Weird Thinking Faith. And I think the first time you guys have ever met, Reverend Laura Wittman is here. She's going to be one of the hosts over there on Systematic Ecology, helping us with that show. She's also a Methodist. I know she's a minister, and it has something to do with college, and she's cool. But I'm blanking on the rest. Help me out real quick.
I am currently serving as the chaplain of Lewisburg College and the coordinator of Lighthouse Congregations for the North Carolina Conference.
Gotcha. That is cool. That sounds so official. I need more official titles for myself. Another official title, my pastor, the one and only pastor of the Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Pastor Will Rose. How's it going?
It's good. And I remembered, since this is a round table, the first time you met me in person, you looked at me, you said, your head is rounder than it is. Karen. Yeah. I was like, man. So I'm glad my round head can be a part of this round table.
Yeah, this whole series is actually inspired by Will's head. It's the sponsor.
Sponsored
by Will's head. We are also joined by the most frequenter of the roundtable, Pastor Joe Dea. He does the home church. You guys should know him from like a million different podcasts and other things that we talked about on here. But yeah, he's a pastor of a home church, leader of several Christian podcasts, as well as his own network. Did you want to talk about mention what the network is real quick? Because I'm blanking on the name.
Yeah, KFM Broadcasting, where we live out our faith through our fandoms, through our theology, and through every part of our lives.
Beautiful. And we will link that below with everyone's links. There'll be lots of links today. And Joe actually is the one who inspired today's conversation. So in the last roundtable, we were talking about fruits of the Spirit, and he talked about how maybe it's more than just attributes, and there's something more spiritual there. And yeah, we're gonna use that as a springboard later on for this episode. Yeah.
So, if you like our show, if this is your first time here, what's up? Thank you. But you should check out the On His Own Ministry Podcast Network. Much like Joe, we do have our own network that we partner with and run to, just kind of get a bunch of people out there, listen to a bunch of stuff. You can also get in our Discord server. The link to that is in the notes. You can talk to us on there. You can bug us on there. There's a little feature called pinging, and you can just @ everybody, and then everyone on the server has to see what you have to say. So check that out.
Don't encourage that. Oh, man. All right. Well, with that, everyone listening knows, and hopefully everyone here knows, I like to start our episodes off with the holy sacrament of silliness. Because you can't be not in unity when you're being as silly as I like to be. And this one's kind of a little bit more straightforward. I tried to make it straightforward for the roundtables. What is the best profession that a turkey could possibly pursue? All right, Josh wants to go first. I'm going to throw this to Josh.
So my answer is a phenomenologist, because they are loud. They kind of puff their chest up and squawk around a lot, but they can't fly very far. And so a phenomenologist would be my answer for turkey profession.
So I guess I get to respond to that. I think a turkey might be a podcaster for exactly the same reasons.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go. I'm thinking that they'd be all right at landscaping, or like pest control. Like they go through your yard, pick out any bugs, keep it nice and on the level. I think they could handle that. Laura has one. We're just going all kinds of order today. It's fine.
Okay, so here's what a turkey would be, and that is a tofu salesman, obviously, to try to distract from the market that is mass turkey homicide at Thanksgiving. They would be the ones responsible for encouraging the tofu market, obviously.
I'll just have to let them know they won't be successful for me at least. TJ, what do we got? What's a turkey's best career path?
Well, I think if Initial D couldn't get people to eat tofu, then turkeys probably can't get people to eat tofu. But I was thinking, I don't know the official name for it, but a trailblazer. They work for the county. They just make trails and parks.
Oh, okay.
It's just a big team of them because,
yeah, I could see
only have their beaks.
I could see it. See it. All right. Will, what career path are you sending a turkey on?
Well, some of you guys know my dad passed away not that long ago, a few weeks back, and he was notorious for calling UNC basketball players turkeys when they missed shots. So he was trying not to cuss, even though I learned all my cuss words from him watching Carolina basketball. He later in life tried not to cuss in front of grandkids and stuff, so he would yell and call them turkeys. So right now, the way that basketball team is playing, UNC basketball player, a bunch of turkeys.
All right, Joe, take us home. What is a turkey's best career path?
Flagger for road construction crews. The way that they stand in the middle of the road and do not move, absolutely fantastic flaggers.
The slow guy. The slow.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Joe, while you're speaking, I'm going to go ahead and throw the first question to you because it's about something we talked about last time. In that last round table, the fruit of the Spirit came up as something that's we were arguing should Christians have the fruit of the Spirit because they are Christian, or are they Christian because they have the fruit of the Spirit, or is there something else going on? You were kind of getting at there's something more than just attributes. There's something spiritual going on. So could you kind of unpack a little bit what that miniature debate was about and I don't know, just kind of springboard us into this spirituality conversation here.
Yeah. So what had happened was you had posed that they're just basically personality traits of folks that would be Christian. And I argued that while other people outside of the faith may have these personality traits that may be because of the deep metaphysics of exposure to the Spirit. So if we take seriously the realities of the Holy Spirit and the realities that this is a world created by and inhabited by God, then what if the real McCoy, if you will, is had by Christians because of exposure to the Holy Spirit, and that outside of that, it's reverberations, if you will.
Yeah. And I think part of my, not pushback, part of my hesitance, maybe, I don't know how to word it, actually comes from Josh Patterson. So I'm really cool that Josh is here, because he keeps like talking about this like radical theology stuff. And then I'm like, wait a minute, but like, what if there's some truth to that? What if it's not just Christians, but like anyone can actually actualize, love, joy, peace, gentleness, goodness, kindness, self-control? Like what if it's not just attributes, and it's also not just, hey, only Christians have this thing, but what if it's more something that we're able to realize? And then to throw my own spin on it, like the more I get into Taoism personally, there's a lot of this like emptiness, and we actually can't know, and stop trying to define and know things that aren't definable or knowable. So I got a lot of that mixed in, where I'm just kind of hesitant to be like, yeah, fruits of the Spirit, that's a Christian thing, where Christians have this spiritual thing that God gives them. Not that I dismiss your take. It's just kind of, I'm starting to see things differently, I think.
So the question being, can anyone have fruits of the Spirit, or is it just Christians? And we are going to let everybody get their shot at that. And we're going to make Josh Patterson go first because it's his fault.
Yeah, Josh. That's what you get for having a name like that, too.
Yeah, that's fair.
So
all right, so it's fruits of the Spirit, right? Not, I guess, a larger question, which would be like spiritual gifts or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I would be comfortable saying that something along the lines of, especially this, dang it. I'm at odds with myself because I'm trying to answer it from two different perspectives. Since I started with process, I'll go from a process perspective. Again, I would reiterate that God is present in and through all things at all times, luring all aspects of creation forward, in each moment of becoming. And so if the fruits of the Spirit are something that are part of God's will for us to carry out, then God can be offering those things to all of creation. And then we have the ability to actualize them, to give in to that call. And I don't think God is only active and present and engaging with Christians, but like I said, all of creation. So I would say, I think anybody can manifest the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah. Real quick, since Josh and I both kind of commented some on this, before we get to everybody else, Joe, did you want to respond to any of that? Because like, I feel like you're not saying that only Christians can have an experience of God, but I'm not entirely sure I'm getting what you are saying.
Yeah, so it definitely feels like you both are going in a direction that I definitely didn't go in. That it's not there isn't a measure of exclusivity. If anything, it's inclusivity. Because when you talk about the magnitude of the God of the universe, sure, there are things that can be felt and experienced by everybody. The fullest manifestation of said thing comes by way of exposure to the Holy Spirit. And so I'm definitely not saying that it's a Christian only thing and Christians are the only ones that can experience it, but that God is so pervasive that we need to take a look at something beyond where this whole thing started, of them just being personality traits, and being something more than that. So I want to make sure that the things that are being responded to are definitely within the lines of where the conversation started in the first place.
Yeah. Will.
Yeah, I kind of like where Joe's going with this in terms of speaking of sometimes we turn in the fruits of the Spirit or the gifts of the Spirit into some like spiritual Myers-Briggs kind of test, and that's what you're born with, or Strength Finder or something like this is this is yours, and once you accepted Christ, then you're gifted with these personalities. But I think we carry our own personality distinctiveness with us, but I also think that same way like God is a part of all of creation and all beings. Same way we talk about truth with a capital T, love with a capital L, is not just exclusive to Christians or people who claim that Jesus is the Christ. That pervades all through creation and all people and all human beings, since all are created in the image of God. So my reflection and meditation on that leans into that. These are gifts that are given apart from ourselves, but there is an aspect of kind of choice or conscience or intention of leaning into practicing these things, that you're invited or lured to be a part of it, and then we have that kind of whether it's our personalities or choice or intention to accept it, to grow in it, to practice into it, as if like any gift that you have, you could take any gift and ignore it and not grow into it, or you could take it and use it and grow in it and evolve with it and those kinds of things. So that's kind of where I'm thinking these spirits. Mm-hmm. It's not exclusive just to Christians. One day I say a magic prayer and then it's given to me, but it was there from the beginning. And then once I acknowledge and lean into it more, I then become practice and get better at it, kind of thing. Is kind of where my reflection meditation goes.
Okay. Yeah, I feel a similar way. I don't really think spiritual fruits are exclusive to Christians. I think that's kind of an insane thing to say, that only Christians can be gentle and kind. That's just me personally. I think it might help a lot, might make it a lot easier if you're a Christian in some cases, but to me, it's just a wild claim. So, anyone else feel like they have anything else they want to add to that? Because to me, it's pretty cut and dry. Go ahead, Aaron.
As a philosopher, which for the listeners, if you haven't heard the interview that I did with them, I am not a theologian. And so the kinds of responses I'm going to give are going to try my best to defer to the theologians about deep theology and say there's some philosophical overlays that may be productive. So I'm a postmodern philosopher, but I am also a Pentecostal Christian, or doing the best I can to be one. And so that tension for me is definitely one that leads me to a radical inclusivity. I'm a hopeful universalist when it comes to the mode in which God might interact with the world. But the earlier sort of jovial ribbing between Josh and I is because we are both relationally inclined theists, but I'm an open theist as opposed to a process theist. And one of the distinctions that I take so seriously about that difference is I am still absolutely a robust personalist when it comes to the divine. I'm a theological personalist. And so what I would suggest is that something like a phenomenological account of being loved is something that can actually invite us to understand what a Christianity-specific understanding of the fruits of the Spirit might offer, not as an argument for exclusivism, but as a rationale for why, well, then who cares about being Christian if you can have all of the stuff without that, right? So it's not a claim about soteriology. It's not a claim about access to heaven, or it's a claim about you're either now good or bad. But to say something like Jean-Luc Marion, when he says there's a difference between loving and receiving oneself as having been loved. And so part of what I take seriously about being a Christian or trying to become one is that from the outset, anything that I think I can pull off as good in the world is a response to my having been loved by a person right? A personal God who is so invested in the good of the human condition that's why those sorts of fruits make a difference as lived practice, right? So it's not at all to say you have to be Christian to display these fruits. It's something more like, accidentally throwing a line into a trout stream. You might catch the biggest trout of the day. But there's a different thing that happens when you intentionally are casting into that hole because you're making sense of the way the water flow behind that riffle is likely to carry trout, right? So for me, that's what Christianity offers, is not some special access, but a kind of lived mode of receptivity that maybe gives us a weight to why these fruit are so fruitful. So there's the phenomenologist take on maybe how this matters for me.
Ooh, that's interesting, man.
Real quick, just like in terms of like Dr. Simmons talking about, I love how he's using a fishing reference because camping, fishing. I love that.
Yeah. I'd like to go camping with Kierkegaard myself.
Yeah, there you go. But it's this language like Lutherans will use, and I think all denominations will use it too. But this difference between if, then, because, therefore language. And so it's not like if you become a Christian, then you can have gifts of the Spirit. It's like because these gifts of the Spirit are there for you, therefore I live into it and respond to it in a way that I live into that gift that's given to me. Luther in the Catechism also said with the third article of the Apostles' Creed that faith is a gift, that even faith itself is a gift from the Holy Spirit. And so we respond to that faith and we lean into that faith. We practice that faith in our daily lives. That even faith is not just something that I create on my own strength, but it's also a gift from the Holy Spirit that's given to me. And because it's given to me, therefore I respond to it and lean into it and grow into it. So I just had to get that in as the Lutheran on this roundtable.
Well, and it's important to just distinctiveness, right, is what I want to maintain, right? Because I once had a student who asked me, so she wasn't religious at all, and she got really, really mad and disappointed in me when I said, I think there is a degree to which my Christianity does open a different relationship to the idea of love. And if it didn't do that, then I'm not sure what it is we're doing by trying to take seriously on podcasts and in communities. Why then keep talking about all the God stuff, right? If there's nothing distinctive, what's the point? But distinctive doesn't mean superior. It doesn't even mean better. It just simply means there's a reflective dynamic here that maybe has something to recommend it, right? And that's a risky gesture. So distinctive doesn't mean superior. And I think that's something that in broader evangelical Christianity, distinctive almost always indicates a superiority that then functions within an exclusivism. And that's the thing I think that we should oppose as Christians.
Yeah. As somebody who sits on a weird line of, in some ways, for those of you who don't know me and haven't heard me speak, there are some things that you're going to hear me say where you're going to be like, yo, that dude is probably the most theologically conservative person out of the group. And then there's going to be other times where you're going to hear me say something where like, oh, that dude likes to color outside the lines. I'm not ever you're not gonna hear me say that I am a universalist. That is not a title that I would claim for myself. But I certainly believe that modern evangelicalism has missed the point when talking about the grand nature and scope of the God of the universe. That there is this dichotomy that we and Dr. Simmons mentioned it, where there's almost like this implied superiority that's spoken behind the scenes of, oh, as Christians we get the good stuff, we get the top shelf stuff, whereas the heathens of the world, they can go hang out in the clearance aisles. You know what I mean? They get the bottom shelf stuff. Like, it's not that. But there is a measure of reflective nature to the person who is living out of relationship And that's a weird thing, because I think as children, that idea of living in relationship with Jesus is presented from authoritarian perspective. And we're trained in a model that says, oh, I'm going to say this and I'm going to memorize scripture and I'm going to do all of this stuff to appease the authoritative structure in my life. But in all actuality, as adults, there is a measure of, okay, are we just trying to be good people, or are we trying to be something more? Is there something more to the spiritual experience of the man than to just be a good person who's happy and joyful and a pleasant person to be around? Or is there deeper resonance for the human being that goes beyond just the person who would call themselves a mainline Christian?
Yeah.
All right. So sometimes it feels like the more spiritual Christians focus on the spiritual gifts instead of the fruits of the Spirit. So does anyone have any idea why that might be? I know for me and Aaron, we're Pentecostal. So
I grew up Pentecostal. I'm still half.
Yeah.
Wait till our spin-off podcast. It's going to look exactly like 2.5 Men, but it's going to be called 2.5 Pentecostals.
Yeah, 2.5 pence. Yeah. Should debut sometime next year. You know how TV deals go. But why might that be? Who knows? I want to hear ideas.
I think I'm United Methodist pastor, so we have a long process of ordination in the Methodist Church. You got to sell a kidney and do all of the life processes that go along with it. But in our process, one of the things we talk about early on in the process of not even just ordination, but licensed ministry, when you're discerning your call into ministry, we talk about fruits of the Spirit a lot. And in that, we're not talking about those gifts like, can you sing in church on Sunday morning? We're talking about, where is the fruitfulness? And one of the things I think that the Methodist Church does well, in that, maybe too well sometimes, to a fault, but one of the things that they do well is asking, how can you measure the fruit of your ministry and the fruit of what you've actually done in the world around you? And again, this isn't just about being Christian or being a follower of Christ, but where do you see the fruits of what you've put out into the world? And there's lots of different ways we see that measured in different traditions and different religions, even something as simple as karma, like what do you put out into the world, right? And I think sometimes we get so caught up in what our gifts are that we forget that the measure of our gifts is that fruit of the Spirit. Where have you actually seen something happen because of your faithfulness or because of your growth with God? And we had that language about relationship, right? Talking about, how do we build relationships with one another? How do we build authentic relationships with God and with the people that we're in community with? That isn't, as you said, appeasing the authorities or trying to, be able to recite the most scripture or do Bible drills or things like that. But how actually, which I still have trauma from as a kid, but
I always won, so no trauma here.
I had never was anywhere near, and I was the preacher's kid, so that made it even worse. But yeah, I mean, how do you actually show that measurement of relationship and of faith, and how you grow with God in a way that allows you to produce fruit? That was a long answer, so I'll let someone else talk.
No, I love it. Also, for anyone who's not on YouTube, jump on YouTube long enough to see how cool Laura's backdrop is. It's fantastic. Yeah, that's all.
JP's background's also pretty cool. Colzic jersey.
True.
In a frame.
True.
That's sick. I'm not paying to get any jerseys framed.
Well, Will's got Captain America, so that he gets a bonus.
It's the amount.
I'm moving, so I have an excuse. Yeah. Usually I'd have an Indiana Jones poster back here, but
we can imagine it.
Yeah, just pretend you see Harrison Ford every time you see me, actually.
Yep. So I think what happens a lot here is we live in such a sensationalist society. Like, someone being exceptionally kind or exceptionally gentle because they're Christian is not going to get anyone's attention. But here's somebody healing the sick, speaking in tongues. That's the kind of thing that grabs attention. gets attention, and that's what most people care about these days. So I think that's one easy answer as to why people are more worried about the gifts than the fruits. But
yeah. Well, and that's where I am still a continuationist. I'm still like got a lot of my Pentecostal speaking in tongues stuff being real. But that's where like I get where some cessationists are coming from of like, hey, sometimes maybe the stuff is borderline demonic because a lot of people who speak in tongues, like the way that they act, I just have a hard time believing God's in that business, And what's funny to me, like what really kills me is like, there's this book called 1 Corinthians that's in the Bible where like literally Paul's like, hey, speaking of tongues, this and all that. And somehow we still make the same fault that's like directly talked about in the book. It's like,
it's nothing new, right? Like there's like 1 Corinthians 12 and 13. Like there's a reason he wrote that from the very beginning. Like it's in terms of like hierarchy of gifts of I'm special, you're not, I'm better than you are. Look at me. I have more Instagram followers than whatever, comparing one another, is part of being human, I think. And so, even from the very beginning, Paul was trying to sort that out with those early churches, trying to figure out these gifts and working together as a team. North Carolina basketball, come on, and others. So, anyway, that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah. Well, I haven't heard J Patty speak for a second, so I'm gonna throw the next thing to you, Josh. Sorry, guys, I still call him J Patty. I don't know where that came from. Like at some point I heard someone say that and I'm like, there's too many Joshes. So that's just how his name registers in my brain.
Isn't that his Instagram handle? Like, isn't that like,
is that it? Is that where that came from?
It is. It's my IG handle. And I actually was given that nickname in middle school when I was still tall enough to play goaltender in soccer before the goals got bigger and I didn't.
Yeah, that's real. That's really annoying.
J Patty was the nickname I was given.
That's funny. I think what's funny is I'm about to throw you a phenomenologist question, but it's fine.
Ask Aaron.
No, it's good. You got this. No, I wanted to see if anybody wanted to share anything. I'm just going to put Josh on the spot first just to help everybody else think. As far as like just experiences within the church. Like I feel like, and Josh actually mentions this in his own podcast, like it's hard to shake that Christian label, even for some of us who are like not so sure about stuff anymore. Like usually I'm on board, but I have my moments where I'm like, do I want to be called Christian when I see like what some of these people who are calling themselves Christians are doing? And I'm like, I'm not sure. But then some of these experiences I think are what really hold me to it still. And I think we can't talk about spirituality without at least touching on experience. So Josh, again, you're on the spotlight, but so everybody else can think about any other experiences they might want to share.
So you want me to offer a spiritual experience that I had?
Yeah. Or just if you want to talk like just vaguely about like how your experience has formed you maybe.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I've had, because I could go in two directions. I've had personal spiritual experience that makes me uncomfortable to think about because I don't always feel like I have nice categories for them.
Yeah.
Like I've had really beautiful transformative experiences doing like imaginative prayer with a spiritual director where I have made big life decisions based off of that prayer experience. I quit a job because one of them it kind of involved this a few different spiritual direction sessions. We were doing the kind of imaginative prayer thing and I was really struggling. This was after I stopped being a pastor. I was really struggling with separating my identity with my from my vocation. So I thought Josh Patterson was pastor. And now that I no longer did that, was I giving God the middle finger? Am I like breaking the rules somehow? And so in my imaginative prayer, my spiritual director would have me place myself at the bar that I was working at because that's what pastors do when they stop being pastors. They go work in a brewery. So I'd place myself there and this place was really cool. It had a circular bar. So there was a big circle of people kind of always around me. And she would ask me, okay, where is everybody sitting at the bar? I'd be like, okay, there's some people here. There's a couple here, people over there. She's like, now where is Jesus at this bar? And for some reason, Jesus was always at the end of the circle. Because, the circle had to open up so you could get into it. And so Jesus was always at the end, but he was always the one sending drinks to different people. And, always like waving and acknowledging me while I was there. And that was really helpful to kind of get this sense of peace that Jesus was okay with my current career choice. And then one day I was doing this prayer, and Jesus was no longer at the bar. And I was like looking around, I was like, what the heck? Where's Jesus? And he was standing in the entryway to the brewery, and there were two people standing in front of him. And Jesus was kind of like beckoning myself to him, and it was like, okay, it's time for you to go, but like you have to forgive these people before you can leave. And so in my imaginative prayer, I forgave these two people who caused me significant harm at this brewery. And then I left with Jesus. And then I went downstairs and told my wife that I was quitting my job that day. I don't have categories for this. It was an experience that I remember vividly, like it actually happened. But like, I don't know. Was it real? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Does it matter? I don't know. So that's a spiritual experience I had personally. And then I think, anyway.
No, I like that. That's it tracks with me in a lot of ways. You know, growing up Pentecostal, I've had a lot of experiences that I don't quite have words for. And then those who are aware, which I think is pretty much everybody here, probably a lot of the people listening, there was a shooting at my house last year. And one of the things I struggled with is going through, okay, well, maybe I should deal with radical theology and then it'll make me feel better. Because like this whole idea of God predestined this to happen pissed me off too much. So I can't hold on to that. And then I was like, well, God not existing at all and being with us kind of sucks. So I couldn't hold on to that. And then like Tom Ord's thing of like, oh, hey, God's working with us. And I'm like, well, where was God here then? Because like, you know, my dog just isn't good enough to work with God here. Like what none of it really satisfied me. And that's where like I've been kind of borderline on this Taoism thing for a while, but then this whole idea of like, hey, stop finding answers, stop defining things. Sometimes we should disregard a lot of this stuff and let things just be. And you know, it hasn't given me any good answers, but it's calmed my spirit a little bit, and that's what I've been meditating in. So for me right now, my spirituality is probably closer to a Taoist spirituality, even though I grew up Pentecostal, and that's probably how I understand stuff most of the time. Right now, that's just more useful for me. So that's where I'm at. Yeah. Speaking of Pentecostal, do either of the Pentecostals want to talk about experience? Because that's kind of high up there on that.
So something that I'll give is a experience that I had, but it's a experience of challenging our typical conceptions of what experience looks like within charismatic or Pentecostal traditions.
Ooh, I like it.
I've told this story on some other podcasts, maybe on Josh's. Highly recommend, by the way, to the listeners, Rethinking Faith. I think Josh is doing some really, really cool stuff since recently. So I was, I don't know, 6, 7, 10 years ago, auditioning to play drums at a very large charismatic Pentecostal church in a city where I live. I had been a professional drummer for a very long time, so auditioning to play drums was kind of no big deal. So I rolled up and went in and played drums, and then they put me in this like hot seat surrounded by all of the musicians. The music director was the wife of the head minister, head pastor. And the first question out of her mouth was, well, Aaron, we know that you take intellect very seriously and that you're a very thoughtful person and you're clearly a good drummer, but we're a little bit concerned because we don't really see the spirit in you. So can you tell us how it is that God just speaks to you or is active, experiencing God in your daily life? And how God just sort of, again, kind of just quickly pricks you as you're moving through the life. And I said, well, I'm perplexed by your question because it seems to me that the categories you're providing me with to frame the experience of a divine, speed, daily, quickness, visibility, these are categories of capitalism, not Christian theology. And so the conversation only went down from there, I should note. And at one point, I responded to them and said, look, when you understand experience, you almost always are talking about the very thing that would make it objective and universal, right? You're talking about gold dust falling from the ceiling that everybody then can see. And the reason you do that is it elevates your church above all the other churches because that's the thing that they see here. And I said, well, when I read the canonic account of a God who loved so much that the human condition was participatory rather than something to escape, it seems to me that Jesus goes where the hurting are, not where the signs are, right? So it seems to me that maybe there's an inverted conception of experience on offer in a lot of charismatic churches, despite still holding theological commitments to the potential veracality of those things, right? I have a phenomenological defense of glossolalia, though I've never spoken in tongues. But it's just so easy to commercialize, commodify, and then deploy experience as some sort of external criterion by which you then elevate your church or your congregation as now the hallmark of what it looks like. And it seems to me that when I was growing up, we kept being told, go into your prayer closet where no one can see. And yet there's an awful lot of pastors running around saying, look at us, and then making t-shirts that say, I heart my church, and not recognizing the idolatry that they then bear upon their own, cotton blend, right? So I think experience has to be inverted in order to understand how is it that experiences transform me, not how can I deploy an account of authoritative experience to try to then dictate how the world should look.
Yeah. Well, we are going to have to move on here in a second. I love that answer, but I wanted to throw this to the Christian mystic of the group. Joe, you've kind of more recently got into this whole mysticism thing, but I feel like that puts you in a unique place to talk about experience and spirituality. So I didn't know if you wanted to comment real quick before we moved on.
I jokingly call myself the longest overnight Christian or Christian mystic in the world, because this has been a process over the last 6 years, really, and I've just it's taken different wording and things like that. So I vibe a lot with what Dr. Simmons just said, that it is so easy to commercialize experience. And I'm still in this weird space of whether or not to go forward stating the verbiage, and it seems innocuous. It really does. It seems like I'm splitting hairs, but if you are aware of the labeling and the word choice, you understand just how much weight this difference has. Whether or not to say going forward, I am a Christian mystic, or I study Christian mysticism, because there are a lot of people who go forward talking about mysticism in a modern sense that are not in any way, shape, or form tied to the ancient mystics. It is a modernized reinterpretation that elevates mankind to the fourth member of the Trinity. And in that version, there's a lot of emphasis put on, let me tell you about my experience. The issue with that, though, is if you go back and you read the original mystics, they warned against doing that, because it gives a weird air that you are somehow holier than another person. It presents a weird situation where now you have presented yourself as some kind of hyper spiritual authority. So to answer your question, Josh, at a base level, have I? Yes, I have joked, but it's not a joke, that my come to Jesus moment reads like a Hallmark movie, bro. Like it is got the bells and whistles. It is radical. My world shattered in the best possible way when I met Jesus. But the experience of the individual isn't about gold dust coming from the ceiling, as the doctor said, or these big radical moments. They're in the quiet, transformative moments where you are walking with Jesus, when you are living with your God. in a real sense. This is not hyperbolic, y'all. This is not, I mean this in the most shot out possible sense that I could possibly frame it. I mean that literally, not figuratively. But that doesn't necessarily mean hyper charismatic expressions of the faith in the most standard sense of it. I too can also give a defense of exactly why I believe that things like speaking in tongues, healing, all that jazz do still happen today. Do I believe every dude that gets up on the stage and starts shalam-a-lama ding-donging all over the place and starts knocking people over here, there, and everywhere and freaking out everybody? No, I don't. Because that's not what Scripture says. That's not the example that we have in Scripture. So I think this is, I agree that in order to really get to the actual root of what it means to have an experience as a human that has engaged with the divine, we need to get out of the framework of selling your experience as something greater than the next guy's.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, there's a lot to that. And a couple quick remarks, and then TJ is going to bring us into the roundup. But for me, and maybe this will be a good future roundtable conversation, is there is this troubling thing of like, when do we believe this stuff? I still do believe in the glossolalia. I speak in tongues when I'm in my car and I hear certain worship music. I don't have a defense for it, so I'm going to need Aaron to pass that along to me, so I have one. But I just do it, I just allow it to be. And yet at the same time, I have a lot of troubledness around this because, I do remember the first time I was at a church camp and someone was praying for somebody else. And, we usually have these big Pentecostal moments. And someone said, "Hey, why are you trying to push me to the ground?" And then I realized so many times when I saw someone fall out in the spirit, they were literally just being pushed. And I'm like, oh, now what do I do with that? I don't have an answer, but maybe that's a good discussion for a later date.
Cool. So, like he said, we're going to do our round table, round up. If you've been on this before, you know what the deal is. If you're new here, I'm going to read out 4 questions, so everyone's going to know what they are. Then we're going to go one at a time, and all of you are going to answer one of the 4 questions. You have to repeat the question you're answering, and no one can ask any follow-up questions until we're all done. So, we have 4 questions. There are 7 of us. So, we might just get 7 different answers to the same question, but we might get most of them twice. So, Josh and I are also participating, and here are the questions. A is, how would you differentiate spiritual gifts from other kinds of magic or witchcraft? B, what kinds of contemplative spiritual practices do you personally participate in? C, are spiritual gifts something beyond our control, or do we participate in them? And do we need to exercise or build up our gifts? And D, can contemplative practices build up or increase the presence of the fruit of the Spirit in us? So, think about it for a second. I'm going to make Josh go ahead and go. Josh, host, not Jay, Patty. So, Josh, which one of our questions are you going to answer today?
Man, this is a hard for. I'm going to go with B. What kinds of contemplative spiritual practices do you personally participate in? And I'm going to do a weird one. I still read the Bible every day, like hardcore every day. I know a lot of like more progressive Christians are like, "Oh, hey, the Bible, it's still, whatever." And I don't know. I probably don't consider myself progressive, but like, I don't know. I live in this space where a lot of people to my right are like, hardcore, here are these theology books you have to do, and a lot of people to my left are like, here are these practices, and I'm like, I still, even if I don't agree with it, I just enjoy reading the Bible and kind of like sitting with it, having conversations with it. That's me.
Cool. I am going to go ahead and go, and I'm going to go for are spiritual gifts something beyond our control, or do we participate in them, and do we need to exercise or build up our gifts? The way I see it, spiritual gifts, and the way I've been explained it to and taught it to, is that you can sure lie about it, but spiritual gifts aren't something you control. They're something that comes over you, and you're just kind of washed away in. So that's what that is for me as a young Pentecostal guy. All right. Then I'm just going to go kind of in screen order for me right now. So, Joe, round up.
What contemplative practices do you engage in silence and solitude and prayer as dialogue? So silence and solitude is self-explanatory, but prayer as dialogue is a practice of purposefully leaving out Father God, in Jesus' name, stuff like that. And it's intended to create a comfort in your mind to having relational conversation with God.
Good stuff. All right. Laura.
Okay, so I'm going to go with A. How would you differentiate spiritual gifts from other kinds of magic or witchcraft? And I'm going with this one because I love Harry Potter and I love D&D and I love all things that use these sorts of things. But when I was thinking about this question, the first thing that popped into my head is the Patronus charm. And hopefully other people are nerds here and you know what I'm talking about. But there's this gift of sort of a force of light that guides out evil and wards out that sort of thing, right? That everybody has a Patronus. That's your thing. Mine is a dolphin, in case you wanted to know. But I think
mine's literally a ferret. So sad.
But when you play like D&D, if you're a healer, you have certain spells. You can't just use your spells willy-nilly. There's a certain order of rest and ways that you have to use your spells that involve dice rolls and things like that. And I think sometimes we want to think about our spiritual gifts as things that we can just use willy-nilly, however we want to. And that's not really how it is if you're using your gifts the proper way. So if your gifts are gifts of God, gifts that are meant to glorify God, gifts that are meant to give back to God, it's not like just using your Patronus to fight the dark in the world, but it's really building your relationship with God in such a way that those gifts glorify the person who gave you those gifts. So that's my response.
Oh, I like it.
All right, Aaron.
So, Laura, that was the coolest answer ever. I have no idea what Patronus means, so I appreciate the explanation. I've only watched maybe 2 of the Harry Potter movies because my son at one point liked them. So I'm going to take up number 4. Can contemplative practice build up fruit of the Spirit in us? And my answer here is a simple yes. I think it can, but a recommendation. The single best book on how it can is by a friend of mine, Wendy Farley, who does queer feminist, very process-oriented sorts of Christian theology. Absolutely fantastic woman and an amazing theologian. But she has a book called Beguiled by Beauty. And I use it in my philosophy of religion classes. It's something that resonates deeply with non-religiously identified people who are still trying to seek the kinds of contemplative manifestations of a life well lived. And my favorite example, to be honest, I forget if it's in her book or it's just something she told me personally, but she says sometimes all it takes to will a kind of faithfulness in your life is the contemplative awareness that you might be able to let the song end in the car before you get out to go into the office. Right. So this radical sublimity in the pedestrian, as Kierkegaard would say, or the transcendent in the mundane is what I think contemplative practice can build up in us. And so for everyone, pick up a copy, Beguiled by Beauty by Wendy Farley. It is fantastic.
Yeah, I put it on my wish list as you were speaking.
All right. We'll put that cup down. It's time to talk.
Okay. Yeah, I'm tempted to go like with A about spiritual gifts of magic and witchcraft and talk about the beauty and gift of craft breweries and beer, whether that's witchcraft or spiritual gifts. I think it's both. But I'm gonna lean into spiritual practices because my prayer life tends to be, it's hard for me to sit still. I know it's hard for you guys to imagine, but hard for me to sit still and go, to-do list, sticky notes all over the place. I turn my prayer list or prayer time into like a big to-do list as well for God and myself. But my practice that I really try to do often is just breathing and being still and relaxing my face. Just relax my face and breathe, and then let whatever thoughts or images or people's faces or people that are on my heart come to mind in that stillness and breathing. And then I just lift up simple prayers that God knows what they need, and to be with them and those things. So Joshua has been a part of that. Everyone on this call has been that. Even Aaron, because we've been a part of Theology Beer Camp things. Like, you've all come up into those mindfulness of things. So yeah, I mean, the secular ideas of mindfulness versus like intentional with contemplative practices, I think there's some overlap. There's a Venn diagram, but I'm on the go, and it's hard for me to sit still. So I have to force myself to breathe and be still and relax my face and let whatever comes to mind and lift those names and places and situations to God. That's where I am.
All right. J. Patty.
All right. I'm going to answer the first one. How would you differentiate spiritual gifts from other kinds of magic or witchcraft? And I'm answering this one because it's the one that makes me the most uncomfortable. Because I don't know. Things like this, magic, spiritual gifts, all these kind of things, they still make me deeply uncomfortable because of some like metaphysical commitments and stuff I bring to the table as a process person. So like, I'm a proponent of, I don't know if this is a proper term, but like naturalistic theism. So I don't think that God is out there somewhere and then kind of like breaks into the world, does some miracles, and then pisses back off to heaven. Or that like sometimes God breaks the laws of physics, but then other times God doesn't. I think when miracles happen, I will use that term, fine. It's because God is already active and present anyway, and creation is participating with the divine. Creation is giving into the divine lore, miracles happen. So it's not this breaking of physics. It's not this, again, God out there swooping in, but it's like baked into how creation works and how God and the world are intertwined. And so that leads me to like weird things where like, oh, I don't really know what the difference would be. So what comes to mind though, just from this conversation, might be something like intentionality. Like, what are my intentions in engaging this behavior? Or maybe what is the source? Am I drawing this out of love? Am I actively trying to participate with the divine, to do things that are good and beautiful and true? Or am I choosing to neglect the divine and do things that are selfish, and like hex people or something? I don't know. So all that to say, I don't know. It makes me uncomfortable. But I think maybe intentionality and love, if we lean into love and let that be our guide, then we won't go wrong. So a half-assed answer. Apologies.
No.
All right. So, does anyone have anything to add, or that they just want to respond now that the roundup is complete? Okay, that's just 2, 3. Normally, I would have had to like spray Josh with the water bottle by now, but Laura's hand went up first, so we're gonna let Laura start.
Oh, I just wanted to respond to Josh by saying thank you for reading your Bible. As a person who teaches Old Testament and New Testament at Lewisburg College, I like when people read their Bible. So thanks for that. That's all.
Yeah, anytime. Literally all the time. I love it.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Joe's hand went up, I think. Or was it not?
Yeah, so two things. One, actually, both of them are to the two respective Joshes. First, I actually have a similar response to Laura's. I always appreciate when I hear somebody say that they read their Bible. I think one of the misconceptions that people have when they hear the word mystic in me associated is, oh, I must be gun shy. about reading my Bible. No, I too teach Old and New Testament. I actually teach a class. I travel around teaching a class of teaching people the proper execution of how to read their Bible and what the Bible actually is and all of that sort of stuff. So I always appreciate hearing somebody say like, okay, I'm actually engaging with it authentically. To the other Josh, when we do these kinds of things, it is inevitable that I hear somebody say something that makes me cringe more than anything. But I'm also reminded in moments where I hear somebody be like, look, I don't really have all the best flowery language to give to all of this. I don't have the right framework and all of this thing worked out, but I'm just going to put myself out there in the wind, so to speak, and just put it out there from like what I'm experiencing and what I think and all of that sort of stuff. And so I actually don't think that you had a half-ass answer. I think it's an answer based off of like what I hear you and say. And for the record, I'm not. It was more of a joke setup. It wasn't me saying you were the thing that made me cringe this time. But whenever I hear somebody trying to be authentic, I don't necessarily care as much whether or not I agree with them, especially in the topic of mysticism. I think there's probably a pretty distinct point where we would shoot off in two very, very different directions as far as this stuff goes. But I still can appreciate somebody trying to reconcile what they believe and why they believe it, even if they're doing so in a framework that I wholly and completely would not agree with.
Mm. Can I go, TJ?
You're gonna wait for me to call on you on your own?
I mean, it's your show. You're the boss. See, right there, co-host for TJ, the boss. I was also going to respond to the other Josh, the better Josh, J Patty. Man, I loved his answer because I resonate with that. Like, where like, yeah, it makes me really uncomfortable. And then growing up Pentecostal, I feel like it's probably part of why it makes me so uncomfortable sometimes, where I'm like, I've seen this thing, you know, like I mentioned earlier, where it's like, stop trying to push me down. I'm like, yeah, sometimes this happens in ways that I just don't like. For me though, and I'm going to sound a little bit like my pastor today, Will Rose. When I hear questions like that, even though I wrote the question, so I can tease the question as much as I want, I think it's a bad question. Because like I'm immediately like, well, what do you mean by gifts of the Spirit? And what do you mean by witchcraft? And what do you mean by magic? Right? Like all these things, like these mean so many different things. If you trace like Eastern Christianity, Christian witches were a pretty common thing. Like it wasn't outside the realm, and it wasn't like people who were out there like, I'm going to put an evil hex on someone and I'm worshiping these pagan gods. It was people who like believed that there was some spirituality in the nature and that God was in all things, and they were using like some of the crystals and weird stuff we see kind of commercialized today, but in a more genuine way, in my opinion. And it's one of those like, I don't know if I agree with it, but I wouldn't look at that and be like, that's not Christian and that's somehow different than fruits of the, you know, the gifts of the Spirit, not fruits of the Spirit. So I'm like, I don't know. But then at the same time, you know, when I hear people speak in tongues, well, I speak in tongues, so I don't want to throw it all out, but I also hear people who get in church together and everybody's shouting in these weird languages. I'm like, doesn't the Bible say that that's not how it works? Like I'm like Harrison Ford with that's not how the Force works. So like, and then of course there are people who practice in witchcraft and are cursing people and they're doing it with like these pagan gods. It's like, I feel like there's good and bad in all of this. And I wouldn't have a clear answer. I would want to know what you mean by all these things and probably have a much more nuanced question and answer than what was possible the way that I laid it up as the one who wrote the outline.
Mm-hmm. So, anyone else? Aaron.
So I have two things. One, just because in several of the responses we've said things about Josh, I think you model what it looks like to say, to talk about the divine is to encounter mystery that would rupture any kind of linguistic adequacy, right? Which, of course, for Joe, that's the mystic awareness, is that this kind of apophatic overflow or excess is going to be part of it. However, I want to compliment you. So don't miss this, Josh. It doesn't happen often. In a two-volume set of omnipotence reflections, engaging some Tom Ord stuff, which, as I understand it, the whole church is going to do a roundtable on that coming up, which I think I'm participating in. But Josh's essay in that volume is fantastic. So for a guy who doesn't know how to apparently frame the categories, dude, you do a really, really good job of articulating these views when in print. And so I just want to, recommend 2 volumes on omnipotence. Definitely go read Josh's essay in there. But then secondly, Will, when you kept saying just breathing is a kind of mode of engaging in contemplative practice, it reminds me, of course, in this Hebraic or Talmudic tradition where breath is the only way of adequately pronouncing the name of God. And so Yahweh understood as simply inhalation and exhalation. And so the idea of the name of God being continuously on our lips is taken literally within that tradition. And I once had a pastor in Arkansas, his son tragically committed suicide. And the pastor, several months afterwards, when he was finally back in the pulpit, got up and he said, during this hardest time in my entire life, I found myself weeping. And in the midst of tears and a, grief beyond anything that could be speakable, right? Groans and utterings too deep for words. He said, I found myself then like breathing deeply, like, in the heaves in the midst of weeping. And he said, this idea that the name of God and the presence of God, and here, Josh and Laura, this idea that there's more in this excess, right? Participating with us. For him, that was something that allowed him not to get through by understanding the theodicy that would ever make sense of this tragedy, but it allowed him to take seriously the contemplative practice of speaking the name of God when words were not possible. And so the way you articulated that, Will, resonated with me because I remember so vividly one of the most powerful sermons I've ever heard. And it was just him telling a story about mowing the lawn and falling over on the ground, weeping, and yet recognizing that he was saying the name of God with every breath. So, yeah, I think thinking all about these issues is just so powerful to me.
Yeah, and how did creation start with they're right in Genesis, the first chapter, first couple verses is the breath of God hovering over the face of the deep, and the gift of life being breathed into this human out of the soil of the ground. So yeah. If you're using a surf analogy, I'll use a surf analogy. God was surfing there, the breath of God hovering over the face of the water. but that breath and wind is, I think, important. And to get back to that, and it's not reductionistic in a sense of like I'm just, but yeah, just maybe getting back to just breathing, man, just breathing.
Yeah, and I think Will's
was it so powerful, especially in light of the reality of let me breathe being a sort of social statement against the abuses of power, right? Where bodies get compressed into the molds. And that injustice is sadly too often also deployed as a mode of Christian community, is that we get together to basically make bodies look a certain way such that breathing becomes impossible unless it looks like the categories, the power structures, the authoritative models by which certain bodies get elevated and others get diminished, right? And so just today, the consent decree that came out in Minnesota was making me think a lot about how policing of bodies, the injustice towards persons of color, is also a mode by which we police what experiences count as religious, what practices count as spiritual, and the way then that who gets to be a Christian is often articulated internal to that authoritative model rather than one that is breathing with us, right?
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. There's a lot of good there. So a couple quick recommendations. I love that, let us breathe. And that immediately makes me want Josh Patterson to go on a radical theology rant, but we don't have time. So he'll do that on his own show soon. Check out Rethinking Faith. Also going to plug, Will's going to be writing a book about God as a surfer. And, this might be a weirder plug because I think they're more Reformed theology. I'm not really sure. But King's Kaleidoscope, they have a song called A Prayer. And he literally wrote it right after his son died, and it is quite possibly one of the most moving songs for me ever. But moving on, I'm going to throw this to Reverend Lauren because if I remember correctly, she's about to have to jump off here in a second. So I'm going to start with you here. A lot of our different traditions, we have a lot of different things represented here between Lutheranism and mysticism and radical theology and Pentecostal. We got a lot of people represented here. A lot of traditions criticize one another for either being too spiritual or not spiritual enough. How do we know if we've hit that like that mark? Like that's the correct amount of spiritual you should be?
I don't think there is a correct amount of spiritual. I think that it's like hot sauce, right? So I love hot sauce and I put a lot of hot sauce on everything.
Yeah.
But some people can't handle hot sauce and that's okay. That doesn't make them bad hot sauce enthusiasts. It means maybe they like the flavor of hot sauce. They can only have it in small doses. So, for me, I think a lot of it comes down to relationships and conversations like this, where we're engaging and just having conversations about how we experience spirituality or hot sauce, however you want to look at it. For me, I'm not an overly spiritual, feeling the stuff kind of person. And that's just because I come from a very quiet tradition where we sit very quietly and do quiet things. And it's just different. And that's my comfort zone. But it doesn't mean that I don't love showing up at a Pentecostal church and experiencing worship with my Pentecostal brothers and sisters, because sometimes I just want to experience something that isn't the way I've always done it. So I don't think there is a right amount. I think the right amount is where you feel comfortable and where you feel you're growing with God.
Yeah, I probably agree. And I can't wait till the next time I get to go to church in person and then lean over to Will after he preached and say, man, I really felt the hot sauce with that sermon. Anybody else have any remarks with that, or do we all think that Reverend Laura answered that completely perfectly and no one wants to say anything? Because I'm cool with that, because I really do think that was a perfect answer. I love the hot sauce. Yeah. All right then, guys. Well, you all know one thing we like to ask everybody to do. Maybe we can collectively all come up with something. Like Josh will have his first idea, and we'll all just workshop an idea until we think this is the perfect answer. What is one single tangible action that everybody could do right now that would help better engender Christian unity? We end this show. We always do this before we do our wrap up. So I think everyone here, other than Reverend Laura, actually has answered this before. So maybe Josh, you want to you think Reverend Laura should answer this first then? And we can workshop her answer? Because I just realized she's the only one who hasn't done this. So Reverend Laura, what's something practical people could do that would help better engender Christian unity?
So this sort of relates to my previous answer, but we talk a lot about relational discipleship in the church, especially what I'm working with in the church, which is Lighthouse congregations and the Methodist movement. And I think what that really goes back to is the idea that you don't go into a community and just start a ministry, but you start with relationships. I think one of the biggest flaws that churches have in Christianity in general is we love to go in and colonize and run with our ideas and the things that we think a community needs or that a person needs. And we end up bombing it. My last church experience was as a church planter, and I went in with all of these ideas and I surveyed the community and they hated everything that I said. It turned out what they wanted, that was hard, by the way, but it turned out what they wanted was not outreach or food programs or all the things that I thought they needed. What they wanted was a place to gather and play cards and gather with their kids and be safe. So I think for that answer, relationship has to be the forefront of what we do if we want actual unity in the world around us. You can't establish unity when we're sitting in places of judgment rather than actually getting to know one another.
All right. Yeah. Anybody want to workshop that one any, or are we still just we're all just in awe of Reverend Laura? That's the theme. We're going to wrap this one up. Everyone's going to just follow everything Reverend Laura does.
Yeah. So who wants to tell us what's going to change in the world if we start listening to Reverend Laura?
A lot less turkeys. A lot less turkeys.
But specifically about this.
That was what she said the turkeys would do. That's not what she was advocating for. She herself never advocated for me to stop eating turkey. That's why we're still friends.
Yeah. Turkey is a lot better when Josh cooks it, though.
I do love turkey.
So, I don't know.
I think the tricky thing about relationship right now for me, so here I'll speak to, my Pentecostal roots, like, amen, Laura, like, woo, preach it. Yeah. And then I think, so what's that look like in my life? I struggle a lot right now with knowing how to be in relationship with people who I think have abandoned any kind of good faith effort to be people of integrity, who care about evidence-based argumentation, who are in any sense interested in the deliberative project of democracy. So we are 2 weeks out from the second Trump administration. For me, that is a active threat to the very relationships that you're saying call us to Christian unity. And yet, if I'm called to Christian unity, somehow I have to then model what it looks like to offer invitational love and hospitality in the spaces where I think I'm offering it precisely to those who I see as a threat to it. So for me, that tension is one that I've been thinking through as a philosopher for 20 years. Never has it been quite so palpably complicated as a lived practice as right now. And so for me, it's not a, here's what it would look like. It's, I believe so deeply in the virtue you describe. And yet right now I find it to be the most difficult virtue to display. And yet I've never seen a greater need for displaying it.
I second that full-heartedly. That's the biggest challenge of doing this show is like, I'm like, man, 2025, the whole church is simultaneously the thing I dread doing the most because it's going to be challenging, and also the thing I think I need to do the most. Like, this is a rough project this year. Before we do anything else, though, we're about to do God moments and wrap up and all that. But Joe, since you are kind of inspired this particular roundtable, I want to give you a last crack of like, if we form these relationships and we're doing these contemplative practices, like everything we talked about today, it's been a pretty practical episode. Did you have anything you would add to like what we would see change?
I think we'd find it easier to be able to see the shades of gray that make up the entirety of existence. Literally everything about existence is shades of gray. And if we could actually stop and consider where the other person is and leave behind our necessity for complete and total commonality, then you may see the breeding ground for real and authentic relationship with one another. And for any of us, doesn't matter what flavor, doesn't matter what denomination, it doesn't matter what your background is or anything else like that. If you claim the name of Christ, then the thesis statement is neighbor well, love each other well. And that is that opportunity only comes when we can put ourselves aside.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, guys, I know a couple of you are about to bounce, so I'm going to throw to Will first for or TJ's going to for the God moment. I need to shut up. Sorry.
Yeah, God moment. Before we wrap up, we ask everyone to share a moment where they talk on and recently challenged blessing moment of worship. If you've been here, you know what we're talking about. If you haven't been here, welcome to the God moment. Will, do you have a God moment for us before you leave?
Man. Yeah, it's been a month, y'all. It's been a couple months. It's been crazy.
Yeah.
Family, dad passing away, trying to take care of mom in the midst of Christmas. But man, my God moment is just like, I have a rock star ministry team here at my church, and them like taking the ball and rolling with things. Like, I couldn't be more proud and grateful for that. And so yeah, we pulled off Christmas and Christmas Eve and in a new year, and nothing's going to get easier, but at least like in terms of the people around me and you guys and all that, I couldn't be more grateful for the team and the people in the community around me. So that's my God moment, man. God in people, God in community. Yeah. And with that, beautiful. Love y'all. See ya.
Yeah. Love you, Will.
See ya.
Okay. So Laura, do you have a God moment for us before you leave?
Yeah. This time a year ago, if you had told me I would be serving as a college chaplain and doing what I'm doing now, I would have been like, whoa, what? Because that was not in my path of things I thought I would be doing. And yet, as much as I miss pastoral ministry in the traditional sense, I absolutely love where I am now. And the people I work with are amazing. And one of the best things about campus ministry is that you are off during Christmas. And in 18 years, I have not been off at Christmas. And that was a wild feeling. My husband is a pastor, so I still did all the church stuff, but I wasn't in charge. I showed up and I sang, and that was great. But I'll say the other thing has just getting to be part of systematic ecology and getting to be a part of this. And I get to nerd out all the time. And that is just so good for my heart. So that's my God moment, is unexpected changes and finding new community.
Great. Well, I can't wait to record about Pokemon with you soon. So we'll be doing that.
I'm a fan.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Bye,
thanks for joining.
Okay. So, Joe, do you have a God moment for us before you leave?
Yeah. Christmas was surprisingly non-drama filled, so that's a huge plus. Everything went pretty smoothly on Christmas Day. In a similar vein, except for the opposite, with Laura, I have an opportunity in front of me that looks a bit more traditional than I'm otherwise used to as a pastor. And so I'm currently in the midst of exploring it, but it's to even have the opportunity to consider to consider it is definitely a God thing.
Yeah, man. I'm gonna have to text you about that, because I need to know more. Good thing about having people's numbers.
All right.
Yep. See you, Joe.
Peace, yo.
Okay, so now that we can get back to a more regularly tempoed God moment, Josh and I do usually go first. So I always make Josh go first, so the rest of us have plenty of time to think. So Josh, Noel, do you have a God moment for us this week?
It would have been really funny if you'd be like, so Josh, Patterson, go on. I think that would have been entertaining, personally. Yeah. Man, honestly, for what I was going to say for my God moment, the two people who stuck around the longest are the ones that it's hardest for me to say this to. So this is fun. Honestly, mine, it's challenging, weird. Like, yes, I have the moving and all that, but I'm going to use that for a God moment later this week. So I have to use something else for this episode. I have found myself where, like, a lot of people who I think are just like super, super, super cool and like the smartest people in the world and all this stuff, Josh Patterson and like Aaron Simmons being amongst them, like, legitimately, where I'm like, man, I legitimately remember a time when I was listening to Rethinking Faith going, I wonder if I'll ever get to talk to that guy. And like, hearing Aaron Simmons at the first theology beer camp I attended, I was like, this guy is like, I want to be exactly like him one day. And then like honestly, the thing that got me was, like, earlier, Aaron Simmons was messaging me on Facebook, which, like, for me is already like, what? Aaron Simmons? And he used the word dude. And I'm like, I think I'm becoming friends with people who in my mind are like light years cooler and better than me. So it's like, it's exciting and it's humbling. It's also challenging because it's like, I think that's partially because people like them are seeing something in me that maybe I'm not seeing in me, and maybe I should live up to that better. So that's going to be my challenge, blessing, everything combined.
Yeah. So I will go. My God moment. I feel like I've already said this once, but I'm going to say it again because it means a lot to me. Because I love my friends. I had a friend come down and spend all of Christmas, well, right after Christmas, all of New Year's with us, which is a big time. And we finally got back to like cooking in our house. We all just kind of stopped for a while because I only eat once a day. So 5 days a week, I don't have to, like, I'm not going to cook. I get paid to cook the other 5 days of the week. I'm going to get food. But it's really nice to get back to doing something that I love doing so much without getting paid for it, which sounds wrong, but
I get it.
It felt better to just cook because I love to cook, and that meant a lot to me. It felt so good to do.
That is a good one.
So, Josh Patterson, do you have a God moment for us?
Yeah, sure. I just I'll say being continuing to be invited into spaces like this, I count as a God moment, because even though I no longer think a lot of the things that I used to think or whatever, I still long for community and friendship because I'm a human being. And I've sought that out elsewhere, and it becomes very readily apparent that unless you have say the right things or believe the right things, that you're not actually welcome. And so I am grateful for spaces like this where I can come fully as myself, and still be, I don't know, like a part of things, still feel like, you guys don't, maybe you think I'm a little bit crazy, but not like all the way crazy or something like that. So just spaces like this where we can have meaningful conversations with a wide variety of people from all over, different walks of life. And we can all kind of feel accepted and welcome and loved. That to me is a manifestation of the divine, if I've ever seen one.
Man, yeah, making me blush. Also, you're not as crazy as me, and that's really that's the only line. It's not a high bar.
Yeah, that is the bar. And man, no, I don't even trust Josh to try and clear that bar. So
it's like the old was it Calvin and Hobbes, where Calvin gets super, super angry because he gets like a B on a paper and he's furious. And Hobbes like, "What's your problem? That's fantastic." And he's like, "Now my parents will always expect this." So yeah, you set the bar low enough.
That's what my pastor told me when I started dating. He said, "Yeah, just first date McDonald's."
Yeah. So I have two thoughts that are God moments, but before I give them, I think it's really interesting over the last, 4 or 5 years now that I've been kind of actively pursuing public philosophy alongside my more traditional academic work. It's been so cool to see the relationships and friendships develop, with people, the Joshes and TJ and Tripp and Dan Koch and Tim Whitaker and on, right? It's been so interesting to me because the ways in which we often understand, the voices we hear through our, headphones or see on the screen as people unlike us. And yet one of the really cool things about the kind of broadly Christian, progressive Christian in particular kind of, online space is I really think that it does provide opportunities for relationships. And so, it's humbling and flattering for Josh to say anything about me in the sense that like being a friend of mine would be something that should make you feel good. If anything, it's more like my wife saying, "Oh, good, you've got new friends," right? So believe me, the perspective shifts, right? But it is cool to see this community develop, and being a part of it in any sense is quite an honor. My two God moments are two sides of, we might say, the kind of sublime to the ridiculous. So the sublime, my dad, I guess it's been 3 years ago now, got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and they told him that it would probably be a 2-year lifespan. And he just went back today to the oncologist, and for months now, he's been getting just unbelievably good reports. And they're basically saying, look, let's go 3 more months, and we may just take you off of all of the treatments and all of the drugs because you're just doing too well, and all the numbers are below any cancer indicative sorts of thresholds. So that's certainly a God moment. And I want to put an asterisk there. I think because God is relational and personal, we should be invested in gratitude as a mode of living. We should be wary of acting like there is some sort of radical particularity to that circumstance that would then elevate, my dad in some way differently than my two friends who are dealing with terminal cancer, not getting those reports, right? So none of this is meant as a, thank you, God, for uniquely seeing my dad's circumstance and choosing to move. Instead, it's a mode of, in the good and the bad, I think, help, thanks, wow, and Lamott's 3 prayers are always good ideas. And so that's what I mean by saying that God moment about my dad's good report today. The other one, those are ridiculous. So there's the sublime. Here's a ridiculous. Josh will vibe with, or Josh P will vibe with this one. So 2 days ago, I asked my son, I was like, Atticus, he's 15. I said, I've got to do a Music Mondays. So anybody listening, I do a Substack called Philosophy in the Wild. Go check it out. And every Monday for paid subscribers, I do a Music Mondays post, which is taking some musical, artist, song, rhythm, genre, whatever, and doing a little bit of philosophy in relationship to it. And so it was the first one of the year. And I said, Atticus, you get the first one of the year. You tell me whatever you want me to talk about. That's what I'm going to write about. And my son, without missing a beat, says, do Norma Jean's song With Errors. And I was absolutely the proudest father on earth. And so I'm not sure if this is on our post-it of words not to use, but I was so hell yes to that answer he gave. And it was a kind of God moment, right? This idea that my son at 15 is actually maybe enjoying just a little bit of what I also think is maybe some of the coolest stuff in the freaking world. And having friends, Josh and I both are friends with Mason, who of course, is like went viral by jumping off of a stack at a Norma Jean concert and stuff. Like, it's so cool to think that my son still carries a ganglion cyst on his wrist from where he went down at a Norma Jean pit. Like, I love all of that. And so there's my ridiculous God moment, is that my son gave me an awesome answer to that question.
Well, you see, the best part about a ganglion cyst is we're Pentecostal. You just take a big Bible and whack it, and it's gone.
Smack that thing. Man. That's right.
Oh, man.
Don't do that, by the way, if you're listening.
Yeah. But Aaron, if you ever do Greta Van Fleet, my wife will definitely steal my phone to read that one and participate. She loves them.
It is on the to-do list. I forget if I have done Goodbye June. If I haven't, maybe I can do the two of them together. Tell your wife to check out Goodbye June. It's like Greta Van Fleet, but I think more interesting. And the absolutely best band kind of in that broad sort of Southern revival kind of classic rock space. Hands down, without any exception, the best in that space for me is J. Roddy Walston and The Business, who I have talked about because Roddy Walston is a friend of mine, and I actually taught him some drum lessons when he was a kid. And so J. Roddy Walston and The Business, absolutely some of the best stuff in that kind of Greta Van Fleet space. So tell her to check them out.
I'll have to check that out too. Other thing, quick personal recommendation. If you haven't, you should watch The Good Place, and then we should do an episode about it on our other podcast, Systematic Ecology, because like that. Oh, Josh J. Patty's in on too.
Let me know when you want to. One of my very good friends. Well,
I was going to say Aaron's buddy was like the philosopher for that show.
The philosophy consultant, of that show is a friend of mine. I've had him on my YouTube channel.
Will loves it too.
So let me know. We'll hook it up. Get him on.
All right. I'll email you after this.
Okay, so if you like the show, if you like the episode, please consider sharing with a friend, an enemy. Share with your cousins. If you're already listening on the YouTube channel, what a show you got today. You got to see a ton of us for once. And be sure to hit like, hit subscribe. We'll hit you. No, we won't. That's not legally binding.
Also, check out the other shows on the Anazal Ministry Podcast Network. Sorry, it's just the Anazal Podcast Network. I just haven't updated this outline since we changed that. Rebranding is hard for me. But, the links in the show notes. Two of our shows actually recently got put on some cool lists that, the Homily with Pastor Will is in like the top 10 of Chapel Hill's podcasts now. And then on some list, for some reason, not sure why, because I participate in this one, so I get to down it. Like the top 50 progressive Christian podcast list was we had the Bible After Hours on there. That was kind of cool.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we hope you did enjoy it. Soon we're going to be doing a bonus episode with Dr. Tom Orr, Nick Polk of Tolkien Pop fame and the Nick Polk cult fame, and Josh Patterson of Rethinking Faith about a 2-volume set of essays in response to Dr. Ord's idea of omnipotence over omnipotence. Both Nick and Josh, who is here with us today.
Aaron Simmons will be there too.
And
I just didn't put that in the outline because I didn't know that yet.
I'm going to jump in on that one purely because then Josh and I get to like actively disagree with each other. So that'll be super fun.
It's more exciting that way.
Church unity by disagreement.
But Nick, Josh, and Aaron Simmons all have essays in that book. Then we are going to have Jonathan Foster on to discuss his book, Indigo, The Color of Grief, which is fantastic. His journey dealing with the loss of his daughter and Theopoetics. After that, we're going to have on Kate Blewett to discuss her participation in the Porter's Gate Collective, music for worship services that can be used across faith traditions, from Catholic to Pentecostal churches and beyond. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be joining the show.
He just doesn't know it.
It's not someone that Aaron has some nebulous connection to. So
yeah, but Father Jonathan does. Like, we do know people with connections. We're just that lazy, and that's why season 1 will never end.
It's too possible. Moving on to the next bit is way harder. So.
Yeah, and we just don't feel like moving on to the past that. We've been saying it too long now, you know.
Yeah, getting the Pope on it would be way harder. We're not learning any new languages. He's too old to learn English.
We assume it's way harder. It might be easier. We haven't tried either, actually. We haven't really tried getting either of these guys on.
I should also just note for anybody on YouTube how jealous I am currently that all 3 of the other people currently on the screen still have non-white facial hair. It just now occurred to me, like, I was looking at Patterson, and it's like perfectly styled and all brown. I look up at Joshua Noel, and it's like this thick black beard, and even TJ's rocking brown mustache. And here I am, especially with the light hitting my ball cap, it like exacerbates the whiteness of my goatee. So I'm feeling super old right this minute. So I appreciate all 3 of you for that.
Well, while we're making remarks on people's appearance, I just got to say, me and Brandon Knight definitely talked about how we hate how skinny Josh Patterson is. Like, just like a couple days ago, I was like, this dude literally just made beer for a living, and he's like, like, man, I drink a beer once a week, and I'm in shape. It's just that like pear shape, and I don't know. It's crazy.
I don't know. I keep trying to get Patterson to get on a mountain bike with me, and that has yet to happen.
That'd be a blast.
Well,
it's ice hockey, Joshua. That's my secret.
Oh, okay.
Nah, see, that's ice hockey for me. Oh, yeah. That's a lot.